Hi there, and the big economic story hitting headlines today is the Bank of Japan's decision to double its holdings of bonds and stocks in 2 years. Now, this is the very first decision made by the new BOJ Governor Kuroda as he attempts to reach his 2% inflation target. On this topic today, I am joined by Flemming Nielsen. He is a senior analyst at Danske Bank in Copenhagen. So Flemming, the markets have been expecting an announcement, about easing, but were you really expecting such an aggressive easing?
This was, in my view, substantially more aggressive than expected. It is true that we did expect that Bank of Japan would announce some easing measures today, but what they announced today was, as I said, would even call substantially more aggressive than expected. And that's the reason why we have seen the substantial market reaction, both weaker yen, substantial stronger stock markets in Japan, and long bond yields in Japan plunged. So this was much more aggressive than expected. Particularly what I note is that there is a very strong commitment to the inflation target. We know that Kuroda, the new governor, had been speaking about the possibility of achieving the inflation target possible in 2 years, but nobody expected that there would be a commitment for targeting the 2% inflation within a 2-year time frame. So that was a stronger commitment to the new inflation targets than we had expected. Other easing measures were also much more aggressive than we had expected. It will expand its purchases of government bonds. Overall, the size of its purchase of government bonds is about 8% of GDP. It will now increase to a bit more than 10% of the GDP, but even more importantly, there was an indirect commitment that it will continue this quite aggressive purchase of government bonds next year. So I think that is actually the most important message here, is that there is a strong commitment to the new inflation target, and importantly, Bank of Japan is basically telling us that they will continue the very aggressive monetary easing next year, where we expect some of the other central banks, including Fed, to start to scale down some of their asset purchases. So I think that you can easily justify the market reaction, in my view. I also think that the announcement today supports our view that we are probably going to see continued depreciation pressure on the Japanese yen over the next year.
And do you think this announcement will actually support Japanese equities?
Overall, for the stock market, yeah, I think it is. It will probably be positive for the Japanese stock markets. It appears that the change in monetary policy have really turned sentiment around in Japan. If you look at consumer and business confidence, so in the short run, it does appear that it will support a relatively strong recovery in Japan. Although I think growth will slow, maybe even substantially again next year. At least in the short run, the Japanese economy will probably face a relatively strong recovery, and that will be positive for the Japanese stock market.
And Flemming, just one last question. Now, we also saw a decline in bonds. Will this drop only be temporary?
Bond yields, I think the decline we've seen will probably be temporary, because at some stage people will probably start to look at the future inflation, and at some stage it will also add some upward pressure on the Japanese bond yields. But in the short run, as long as we ease aggressively, they will probably stay low. But at some stage next year, it would be strange if we didn't see some increase in longer term bond yields in Japan.
Flemming, as always, it has been a real pleasure speaking to you today. Now, viewers, if you're interested in hearing about the BOE and ECB rate decisions, do tune in for my colleague Natalie MacDonald's interview on that. But for now, goodbye.